Okay, boys and girls, thank you for joining me once again, where people continue to be wrong on interwebs. I suspect this will be no different. Let's go through it and see how wrong these people are. This is Jeff Nippard, who has said many things that have been completely wrong on interwebs in the past, so I suspect that this one will be the same. Anyway, let's go through it and see how wrong or right it might be, shall we? Jeff, off you go.
So in this video, I'm asking 5 highly qualified nutrition experts.
Wow, by the way.
About the most effective science-based strategies for losing body fat.
Good, yes. Tell us about the science, Jeff.
No matter how you slice it.
Oh, well, there's your first mistake. Having this ass monkey on your channel. This bloke here, scientist, no. Lane thinks mass is conserved.
What, are you retarded?
Which isn't Lane, still. Lane also lacks the courage of his convictions as a scientist to actually front me, an actual scientist, for a debate about thermodynamics. He was asked to do so a few months back, maybe even 6 months ago, by one of the Fine supporters here on my Fine actually science-based channel, and he responded without even bothering to look me up at all. Oh, well, who is this guy anyway, and does he have any scientific credentials or background of any kind? I wouldn't waste my time with someone who doesn't, so I sent him a message directly saying, here is my CV, Lane. It's better than yours, son. So that excuse is gone. Front me for a debate about thermodynamics, son. Mr. Calories in, calories out. Mr. Mass is conserved. No, Lane. Oh, dear, Jeff, you really need to be a bit more discerning. This boy isn't science. This boy isn't a scientist's asshole. This boy's just an asshole. What's next?
The relapse statistics are still pretty bad.
I don't want you to get too hungry. I don't want you to get too full.
While none of these strategies are incorrect necessarily, they're also not required.
Stuff that does, in fact, increase energy expenditure.
Eventually, they will come off of that stubborn area. Your body has to pull it from somewhere eventually.
So to get everyone on the same page, first I spoke with Dr. Eric Helms about the fat loss fundamentals. Now, Eric has published a ton of science-based papers in peer-reviewed journals, including recommendations for physique athletes, protein intakes during caloric restriction, and even binge eating behavior.
It's good, to have people on who do have a significant peer-reviewed publication record. Absolutely, Jeff. Yep. But what you also need to understand is that peer-reviewed publication does not confer correctness on the material published. Passing peer review is a matter of opinion. Where does opinion sit, by the way, on the hierarchy of evidence? The way to know whether something does have veracity is to have their competence to actually analyze the empirical inferences made by any given paper to see whether they stack up. The words on the page are not what's important. The numbers presented by those authors, the raw numbers presented by those authors are what's important. So you need to have an understanding of statistics so that you can analyze someone's statistical inference for its veracity and correctness, actually. Failing that, you actually shouldn't be talking about science and what the science says publicly, because you are not competent to do so at all. Sorry about that.
So he started out by reminding me that on a physiological level, fat loss is very well understood and actually quite simple.
Yep. So fat loss comes from an energy deficit. So
No.
Bollocks!
Not at all. False. Wow.
consuming less calories than you need to maintain.
No, calories are heat. Calories are photons. You're using the term calories as an analogy, as a metric on energy, which is itself a construct and does not exist as an actual phenomenon, is not measurable except by measuring one of the different manifestations of so-called energy that exists. In this case, we're talking about heat energy. Specifically, explicitly, it's defined as such. It's measured as such. Calories are heat. Humans do not burn heat. It's not possible to burn heat. Heat are photons. Photons are evolved when you burn something, some physical substance, something with mass. It's a chemical interaction with oxygen, actually. And it's that which is burning, not some calories. Calories are the result of burning something. Fundamentally, this is just absolutely, completely false. This is ridiculous. Anyone who claims what this bloke with a so-called PhD has just claimed doesn't deserve to hold a PhD. It's just false. It's ridiculous. It's nonsense. Okay, this guy is not qualified. No matter how many peer-reviewed publications he's got, this guy does not know the basic tenets of science and how to call a spade a spade. Okay, he'll probably say, oh, thermodynamics though, there's an equivalence between calories and other forms of energy. Yes, mathematically, absolutely. That's where thermodynamics comes in, a bit. But human beings don't have the machinery to encapsulate heat and use that for metabolic process. All of our energy comes in a chemical form, not in the form of heat. And the mathematical equivalence between chemical energy and heat energy fails in a free-living human being in an open thermodynamic system, i.e. the universe. Ergo, thermodynamics, while still true and correct and absolutely inviolate, is not relevant. Okay? Idiot. What's next?
Weight. Real briefly, you can technically see your body fat percentage go down eating at maintenance while you gain muscle, and you could possibly even, like if you had a really strong stimulus to gain weight, maybe lose, or gain muscle I should say, maybe lose fat in a small surplus perhaps, but energetically you need to be in an energy deficit.
Well, that's different from a calorie deficit though, isn't it, son? They are not the same thing, as I've just outlined. A spade is a spade, and if you want to be taken seriously as a scientist, you need to operationally define terms and use them appropriately, and you've just failed. Your credibility is now in the toilet, Mr. Whoever the hell you were, PhD. Right, what's next?
And on our call, Eric emphasized that it isn't enough to just lose.
Fuck me, really, Jeff? Wow. I'm not allowed to comment on it, so I won't.
Weight. We want to lose as much of that weight from fat as possible and as little of that weight from muscle as possible. And to help us do that, he laid out 5 keys for maximizing fat loss while preventing muscle loss.
And I'll do these in order of importance. So one is got to have the energy deficit.
Well, not necessarily, in fact. Energy balance is one of several factors that impact on your body composition. Your endocrine system functioning, your hormonal functioning, diurnal rhythms, stress, distress, sleep, macronutrient makeup, all have very, very meaningful effects on the outcome. Energy deficit is... Well, number one, it's impossible to quantify and to establish that you are or are not in an energy deficit for most people. You would have to attend to a very, very technically advanced laboratory with very, very expensive equipment and some actual scientists to run that equipment and to make those measurements to get anywhere near gauging how much energy you actually are consuming and how much you actually are expending. The tools that are available to Joe Public to attempt to get some kind of gauge on these things are all so vastly, hugely, grossly inaccurate that it's laughable. You do not need to count or track anything in order to control your body composition. All you need to do is eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet. You don't even need to understand what is energy, because good luck if you want to. The best minds in the world don't even know what energy is. They can't even define the thing other than by a circular argument, a so-called internally valid circular argument. Okay? You certainly don't need to know what a calorie is or track any of them or even attempt to, because you can't. All right? Goodness sake. What's next?
The second thing is, well, how do we know that what we're going to lose is fat? And the best way to do that is to stimulate muscle to stay. So that is progressive resistance exercise. So that's the best tool we have. After that, the next most important thing is making sure that the size of the deficit is appropriate.
Well, you can't do that because you can't gauge how much you are actually consuming in terms of energy, nor how much you are actually expending. So forget about it, son. No. All you need to do is consume the right diet in terms of its macronutrient makeup, and the volume that you consume will be taken care of by your satiety signals. It's the natural design. We've been doing it as human beings for 350,000 years, give or take, and we've also been doing it in species not quite human, but very similar to humans for about 4.5 million years prior to that. None of that time did anybody even think about what energy was or what a calorie was or have apps to track anything. And we were slim, fit, live, predatory animals at the top of the food chain for that entire period of time. Neither did we go to a gym to achieve this physique for that 4.5 million years. Okay? Please stop making yourself out to be an expert in anything whatsoever. You, son, are a moron. You are an imbecile. You also have Dunning-Kruger dripping from every pore, clearly. And you're as arrogant as fuck. You're a child, basically, in short pants academically. Irrespective of the number of peer-reviewed publications you may have achieved in your short career so far, that does not change the fact that what you are saying here is fucking ridiculous. Fact. What's next?
A good general rule of thumb is somewhere between 0.5 to as much as 1.5% of your body weight, but I wouldn't use that higher end unless you are pretty high in body fat.
Body weight, sunshine, can be made up in many different ways, the largest component of which is water. Again, a spade is a spade. If you are talking about fat loss or controlling your body composition by increasing muscle and reducing fat, then say that. Don't use the word weight. It is totally, completely fucking inappropriate to do so. Okay? What's next?
After that, you probably want to have a sufficient protein intake. Good rule of thumb is, I would say, higher than 2 grams per kg. And if you are someone very high in body fat, quick rule of thumb that normally puts you in the right range so you're not over-consuming based on your lean mass is to use your centimeters in height. That typically scales pretty well for.
Geez, Jeff wouldn't be eating much protein then, would he, in that case? He's not a tall man, is what I'm saying. That's not a judgment on his appearance in any way. It's a statement of fact. His statistics are well known. You can go and look them up on Wikipedia. He's not tall. And also the point there is that he's also quite heavily muscled, and 1 gram of protein per centimetre of height for Jeff will not be sufficient. So that's not a good rule of thumb, is it? No. Jesus Christ, this guy is stupid.
For most people. And then finally, the thing I'd mention is an appropriate volume of cardio.
Which is none at all. Ever. By cardio, I mean that range of activity which raises your heart rate above probably about 130 and under about 175 if you are 20 years of age. Okay? Adjust that range as a percentage of heart rate maximum, so-called expected heart rate maximum, or actually if you want to measure it, you can work on 220 minus your age as a loose sort of suggestion. Probably more accurate is 209 minus 0.7 times the age, fine, whatever. There's also a different sum available, or regression sum available for men and for women, if you really want to get into that. Any of those will be near enough. What I'm saying is avoid all exercise intensities in the middle, okay? Absolutely very low intensity, no real stress on your body stuff. Incidental activity, fine. High intensity, top end and super maximal work, absolutely should be done. The middle stuff, no. Never, ever do that. Okay.
You don't want to completely get your deficit from it, and modality and timing is important here. So not right before training, and you don't want something that has a ton of high impact or eccentric components. So a lot.
False. Absolutely, completely false. Again, buff head.
Running would probably be not the main choice. Decent rule of thumb is make sure that your volume of cardio is no more than half of your volume of resistance training, which is something I pulled out of my butt, but it's a decent line in the sand.
Yeah, I think that's a common habit for you, son. I really do. I have no fucking idea who you are, frankly. I've never heard of you. I've never read any of your papers. But frankly, son, based on what's come out of your mouth in this video, not remotely fucking impressed at all. What's next?
And to make it slightly more specific, Eric suggested doing no more than 30 minutes of low-intensity cardio per day and no more than 1 to 2 high-intensity interval sessions per week. Again, assuming you're trying to prevent muscle loss as much as possible. So with the most important variables in place, next I asked Eric about the different types of foods we should eat. Are some foods simply better than others when it comes to fat loss?
Well, I wonder if he's going to get this wrong as well. Place your bets now. Leave a comment under the video. Let me know what your bet is.
A lot of people, especially in the mainstream, will obsess over the types of foods they're eating. Like, people seem to think these foods are better for fat loss and these foods are worse for fat loss. Where do you stand on it really comes down to hitting the macro?
All calories are the same.
Versus there really are some foods that are inherently more fat burning than others.
Both of those statements can be true in the right context. So it does just come down to macros. However, there is some data that suggests highly processed foods have a lower TEF, so the thermic effect, so the energy output side would be lower, but it would just come down to lowering your macros even more. So it still always comes down to energy balance. It also comes down to,
God. Wow. Just the inanity, just the ridiculousness of this pustulous excremental tide of disinformation from these turds online. It's incredible, isn't it, kids?
Want to make your fat loss process easier to follow and less likely to rebound? Or do you just care about getting lean for a temporary time period? If it's the latter and you just don't care about white knuckling it, then yeah, you could just lower the deficit, track your macros, not worry about it, and have some semblance of...
You don't need to track anything ever. You just need to eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet to satiety.
Variety to make sure you're recovering your micronutrient basis, but that's not most people if they really think about it. So I would say for enhancing satiety, preserving energy output, and general control of hunger signaling, you probably want to consume mostly single ingredient food items and not eating a lot of hyperpalatable foods. But there is a balance to be had there to where you don't want to make these foods off limits. You need to have your adult card, is the way we like to put it. Like if someone says, you're not allowed to have this anymore, the natural rebellious teenager comes out. So you need to feel like, I'm making a conscious choice that I'm a part of. These aren't hard rules. This isn't a black and white approach. But most of my meals are going to be fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, and a carb source. And then if I feel like...
Fuck me. No. Just fucking no on that. All of it. Wow.
Like it, if I really want to and it would help me actually follow my diet, sure, I'll have a snack or a treat and I'll work it in.
So after Eric laid out the fat loss fundamentals, next I spoke with someone who's extremely specialized in getting people absolutely shredded. Cliff Wilson is one of the best natural bodybuilding coaches on the planet.
Does he have any qualifications or any actual credence at all in what he has to say?
His clients have won 125 pro cards, 87 professional titles, and 13 world championships in natural bodybuilding.
Well, okay, a good coach never takes credit for the success of his clients, or her clients, as the case may be, or theirs, or Shim's, or Sher's, or whatever. I don't know, all of this pronouns stuff, it really does my head in. I've been told just this week by my friend and colleague, Lord Edward Yellow Ted, that he identifies as a giant in the entertainment industry, and as such, his pronouns are fee, fi, fo, and fum. He's also become quite an expert in camouflage. See if you can pick out Ted. Make a comment under the video. As soon as you can see Ted, say, got him, and point out where he is and stuff. Yes. Right, let's move on. Anyway, what's next?
And I wanted to get him on to ask what the difference is between getting beach lean and getting ultra shredded for a competition.
I would classify beach lean as slightly six-pack abs versus, just absolutely shredded. A lot of what gets you there is the same. It's just the degree to which you do it. You can be a little inconsistent and still get beach lean, but you can't really be inconsistent and get completely shredded, because every competitor, when they start their diet for a show, they at one point reach beach lean, and then you just keep going. So I would say the duration of the diet is probably the single biggest factor, along with the degree to which you are diligent.
Goodness gracious me, you should never have to do a diet to achieve optimal, ideal body composition. it should flow naturally as a result of consuming a species-appropriate, species-specific diet. If there is a problem with your physique, it is down to the diet you have been consuming prior to this point right now in time. If you switch at this point in time to a species-appropriate, species-specific diet, according to a sensible transition into that diet, in some time in the future, your body will optimize depending on how badly your metabolic system is messed up currently on the basis of how bad your diet has been, among other things. So long as you're adherent 100% to the appropriate diet, lifestyle really, not so much diet, because diet infers a short-term intervention or something difficult or some kind of discipline you need to apply, some kind of withdrawing something from yourself or denying yourself something. Diet's a bad word. Let's use lifestyle, nutritional approach, something like that. Okay? And if you have an appropriate one of those, nutritional approach, then it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle, and it's something that you just do and you continue to do it, and your body will optimize. Simples, really.
I should say that Cliff noted that he wouldn't necessarily recommend that you try to get this lean, especially if your main goal is to improve your health. And he agreed that getting truly shredded isn't even a sustainable goal for most people.
There you go, the first sensible thing I've heard in this entire video.
But I did find it interesting that even in these extreme cases of fat loss, it still ultimately just boils down to the same fundamental principles that Eric Helms laid out. You just push them a bit further and for longer. But one thing I was curious about was stubborn fat. Are there any tricks for losing that last bit of fat off body parts that just won't seem to let go?
I would say there's two things. First off, generally the more developed a muscle group is, it will look leaner. Because if you have a given amount of fat in a particular area, like if I hold more fat in my shoulders, which some people do, if I build more muscle in my shoulders, that same amount of body fat will be spread across a larger area. So you will look leaner. It's one of the reasons more muscular people tend to look leaner in general. But beyond that, stubborn body fat is largely going to be determined by genetics and gender and things like that. So I would say that if everything leans out first, except for your stubborn area, if you continue to diet, eventually they will...
No, continue to have the appropriate nutritional approach to life, the appropriate lifestyle, not a diet.
Come off of that stubborn area. Your body has to pull it from somewhere eventually.
I mean, the word diet, by definition, is that which you eat. So, I mean, okay, it's semantics, but I think it's important because of the emotional, psychological implications of the word as it has become, as its meaning has changed in the way that people use the word. Okay, so let's get the word diet out because of that, and instead let's insert nutritional lifestyle or nutritional approach or whatever. Okay.
Right. One thing that I've noticed with this is sometimes you might have someone, let's just say it's a guy who just can't get the lower abs to show. Like there's just always a little bit of lower back fat that won't come off. And we can keep dieting them, but at a certain point, it almost seems like they just start really stringing out, or I don't know if they're losing muscle, but it's like they're just so zapped of energy. How do you deal with that situation? That's a tough one as a coach.
Usually what will happen is once you start to tap into that stubborn body fat, you've typically reached the point of significant discomfort. People who have gotten to that level for the first time, they're probably going to get a little bit stringier than somebody who's never gotten to that level, because at the risk of sounding, engaging in hyperbole, it's very traumatic to sometimes try to get that stubborn body fat off.
I'm not sure why anybody would want, as a woman, to get that lean. This is not a comment about any particular person's appearance. I'm just saying this right now as a question, because what we are being shown on the screen here is an example of a female person who has very, very minimal visible body fat. Again, not a judgment, that's a statement of fact. It's an observation you can all make for yourselves. Okay? That is even less sustainable health-wise for a female than it is for a male. That is absolutely health-wise contraindicated. There will be a very serious price to pay for doing that. Okay? That's not a good idea. So, ladies, you need to protect your health above any aesthetic ideal if for some reason you believe that being quite as lean as it is possible clearly for a female to become under serious duress is attractive in some way. Okay? It's about your longevity. It's about your health long term. Nothing to do with appearance, really. Because appearance is just an opinion, really, isn't it? At the end of the day, what's attractive and what's not. Okay, let's move on.
Off for the first time, and so you are almost bound to lose some muscle mass. You probably
really? If you aspire to that, fine, okay.
Well, we've seen this with competitors over the years, or even with yourself. Then the next time you try to do it again, it's almost like you're mentally and physically prepared for what you're going to engage in, and then you can get it off the second and third time without it being as traumatic, either mentally or physically.
Right. That's super well said. Okay, great. So after talking to Cliff about some intelligent ways to get completely diced for a competition, next I wanted to speak with someone who's more focused on sustainable approaches to fat loss. So I got sports nutritionist Sohee Lee on the line, who did her master's thesis on the psychology of eating behavior. She explained a few of the biggest mental roadblocks people run into and some of her best tips for women.
Well, I think generally speaking, men and women tend to make a lot of the same mistakes, but what I see happening a lot, maybe I see it more in women because I work primarily with women, but what I've seen is that they don't want to hear about a more moderate strategy that they can utilize for their plan. They want to hear, cut out these entire food groups. You can't eat dairy, you have to go keto, try intermittent fasting. And as you know, while none of these strategies are incorrect necessarily, they're also not required in order to see fat loss progress. And I made this mistake to myself for many, many years where I focused more on what I thought was the perfect plan on paper, but I didn't consider my current lifestyle and my current preferences and what would actually be feasible for me to consistently execute day after day after day. So what happened was very common where you get very excited in the beginning. And this is a very common psychology mistake that people make where they rely too much on motivation in the beginning. They underestimate how difficult some journey will actually be. And then 1 week in, 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, they quit. And then they're on to the next thing, right? And I think we call it shiny object syndrome. So they're always looking for the next fad diet, the next cool thing that sounds interesting, rather than, oh, well, what tweaks can I make to my current lifestyle to nudge me in the right direction over time?
And throughout our conversation, Sohee emphasized how important it is to create repeatable habits, so you don't need to be so reliant on self-control for every decision about food.
So there's always this idea that if you want something, you have to just try harder, right? Or if you fail on your goal, it's because you didn't have enough self-control. The research consistently shows that self-control is very, very helpful in the initial formation of habits, but it should not be utilized as an ongoing strategy for long-term behavior change. And the key feature of a habit, unlike self-control, it does not require cognitive effort for the habit to take place.
Right, and that's what happens once you have set yourself into a program of eating a species-appropriate, species-specific diet, which is hypercarnivore. The flesh and associated fat, mostly of large ruminant animals, grass-fed if you please, thank you. No plant material to speak of at all, no carbohydrates to speak of at all, no fibre to speak of at all. That's neither a fad nor extreme, it's just the species-appropriate, species-specific diet for a human being. It is effective, absolutely effective if properly applied, following a sensible transition into that diet from the standard diet or whatever diet you've come from. That's the way to go. It's absolutely sustainable. I can point you to a number of anecdotes and stories from people who have been sustaining such a lifestyle for many, many moons. Actually, the longest one that I'm aware of is 39 years, fully carnivorous. Okay? There are many, many examples of people who are multi-decadal, but not quite to the nearly 40 years stage as well. Myself, I'm about 8 years in now. Very, very sustainable. In actual fact, when I do transgress from time to time for various reasons of distress or whatever else, what I find is that destroys my health status very, very rapidly, and it's actually that which is unsustainable. The sustainable thing is the correct diet, which leads me to a position of optimal and ideal health for me. Okay? So while what you're saying makes sense and is perfectly good, there's sohili. What you're also doing is you are making the false and erroneous statement that people should not eliminate so-called food groups, of which carbohydrates is one, and they should be eliminated. They absolutely should and must be eliminated if you want to have the easiest road to the ideal health and body composition without any effort whatsoever. That's the way you do, in fact, need to go. So that's just a little correction for you there to adopt, should you see fit. And if you shouldn't see fit, well, that's your funeral, that's your lookout.
So if we go into your kitchen or your home environment, your work environment, wherever you spend a lot of time, are there things we can change around to make maybe the higher calorie, the more calorie dense foods more?
Calories are heat. Calories are not a measurement of the effective energy contained in foods available to and accessible to human beings upon eating those foods. Get that word out of your lexicon. Calories are heat. Explicitly, clearly, unambiguously, they are defined as such and they are measured as such. There is no equivalence between the calorie and the actual effective energy derivable in chemical format in foods as consumed by human beings. Thermodynamic transmutation of energy from one form to another does not apply here. We do not have the machinery to do that. This is a false equivalence. This is pseudoscience to suggest otherwise. What's next?
Annoying to access, right? If I put it at the top of your pantry, way in the back, chances are your intake is going to drop substantially because you're not going to be bothered to go that extra effort. We call this designing for laziness. And I like to say humans are lazy by default, and how can we use that to our advantage? Another example, this is called a choice architecture intervention. Let's say you're at work, on your desk there's a clear bowl of, I don't know, M&Ms or Skittles or something, and within arm's reach, right? So it's visible, it's close, it's very easy to access. But if you were to, let's say, put the candy in an opaque container, or put a lid on it, or move it farther away, so I have to stand up and walk over, or simply put it in a drawer out of sight, my intake will drastically go down, again, without my really conscientiously realizing that it's happening.
And many of the points Sohi made were supported on my next call with Dr. Lame Norton, who also
who is one of the biggest cocksplats going around the internet. As I mentioned earlier, absolute buffhead extraordinaire, not the first fucking clue even of first principles, let alone of actual science.
Has a competitive background, but has focused more of his published work lately toward understanding why well over half of diets fail and what we can do to help people keep the weight off once they've lost it.
There's no one diet that pops out as, hey, the Mediterranean diet was best, or hey, low carb.
Mediterranean diet doesn't exist, Lane Norton. There are thousands of different diets consumed by people who live around the Mediterranean. Idiot.
Carb was best, or hey, plant-based was best. Because if you equate them for calories, then all the diets do about the same. And
you can't equate them for calories because you cannot assess how many calories someone is genuinely taking in, even remotely accurately. There is no mechanism available to the general public by which they can do that.
a lot of that is that dietary adherence is pretty terrible across the board. No matter how you slice it, the relapse statistics are still pretty bad. The more people regain it than keep it off.
But despite the fact that weight maintenance is a challenge for many people, Lane has identified the 5 most common weight maintenance strategies used by people who were successful with long-term weight loss.
What we do see is these habits and behaviors. And the first one and the most common one is that these people practice some form of cognitive restraint. So that can be in the form of calorie counting.
Well, that's a mistake. You can't count something that you cannot actually get a gauge on, and you cannot get a gauge on calories. And even if you could, they are not equivalent to actual effective energy in its chemical form that's accessible to a human being for metabolic process. Number one, we don't have the machinery to make that conversion anyway, so it's completely academic. And number two, it wouldn't be a one-to-one conversion for a number of reasons, which we've covered and I've covered in many other fine science-based videos here on my fine actually science-based channel, and also on my other social media video posting platform that I also have a presence on, which you might find for yourselves if you take an odyssey of discovery, and such an odyssey might lead you to finding where that might be housed, perhaps. Anyway, Lane, tell us again how mass is conserved, you buffhead.
It could be in the form of I'm not eating past a certain hour, or I'm not eating before a certain hour, so time-restricted eating. Points, like with Weight Watchers, or carb restriction, or fat restriction. There's any number.
Carb restriction is not a cognitive restraint. It's an appropriate, indicated nutritional strategy for human beings. It's appropriate to our speciation. Our niche is obligate hypercarnivore.
Of ways that you can restrict your dietary intake.
Fat restriction is a mistake. That is contrary 180 degrees out of phase with what our actual design is, and that is obligate hypercarnivore.
Another one that may be a little bit surprising to people is people who lose weight and keep it off tend to self-monitor quite regularly, meaning they weigh themselves pretty often. I don't want to become dogmatic.
Don't ever stand on a scale, boys and girls. The scale is not your friend. The scale will tell you lies about your body composition because it's completely unable to gauge your body composition. Your weight can be made up in all sorts of different ways in terms of your water balance, the largest component of it, which can change markedly from time to time. Your muscularity, your fatness, your skeletal density, all of those things can change and independently have an effect on the one output metric, your weight, on the scale, but it can tell you lies about your composition. You might put on a pound of muscle and strip off a pound of fat. That's a definite win, and you can stand on a scale and the scale will tell you that it's the same weight and ergo you've achieved nothing. That is a lie. Do not ever weigh yourself.
About that point, I'm not saying you can't lose weight and keep it off if you're not weighing yourself regularly, but what that does do is it provides feedback. And I'm not talking.
No, it doesn't provide feedback of utility. Feedback for the sake of feedback is of no value, Lame Norton. None at all. Buffhead.
About like a day-to-day fluctuation, because people get too
ignorant, cowardly, sniveling buffhead.
Wrapped up in that. But if over the course...
Front up, Lane Norton. Come and tell me how mass is conserved again, son. Or come and say that again, only say it to my face and see what happens to you. Come and tell me again about your significant scientific background, Lane. You who doesn't even understand first principles. Mr. Calories in, calories out here. Front up, coward.
Of weeks and months, you see that scale going up, then you can correct for that. And then third point is not surprising, which is regular exercise.
You do not need to exercise at all in order to maintain an ideal body composition. The benefits of a appropriately designed and appropriately executed exercise program are immense, absolutely. However, if you have to exercise to maintain your body composition, then your diet is wrong. Fact. Your composition, your body composition should be ideal, naturally, easily, and without effort. Okay? Simple.
Probably the major reason is there's good evidence that exercise sensitizes you to satiety signals. And then some smaller points that bubble up as well is people tend to use structured programs.
You don't need a structured program. You just need to do the right thing consistently. That's not a program. That's just applying knowledge appropriately, which first of all, Lane, in order to do, you would have to have some knowledge. That's where you fall flat on your stupid, ignorant face. Mass is conserved, says Lame Norton. Good one.
Have success at kind of the highest level, is like hiring a nutrition coach or a dietitian. But even like people make fun of things like or a Jenny or a nutrition or whatever, but those people on average do perform better because just kind of winging it with no plan doesn't usually work out very well.
You don't need a plan unless you would consider just doing the right thing by your body in terms of your genetic speciation and all of that is a plan. Just eat the meat and associated fat, muscle meat, not organs, muscle meat and associated fat of mostly large ruminant animals, grass-fed, if you possibly can. That's it. Rinse and repeat. Add butter if you like, add salt if you like. Water is what you should drink, not the stuff that I'm drinking here. This is coffee. I know I should hand in my card and be named and shamed and pointed at and laughed at, and I should be told I never was a carnivore and I did it wrong because I drink coffee. Drink water. Do as I say, not as I do. Right.
And then something I thought was interesting in a recent study, they found that the strongest characteristic in this particular study that was associated with weight loss maintenance was what's
N equals 12. Get the fuck out of here. Go and learn something about statistics and statistical inference. N equals fucking 12, Lane Norton. The value of this study is 2/3 of 5/8 of fuck all.
It's called low recency. Basically, do you value long-term data more than short-term data? A very easy example of that would be, well, I really want to eat this donut right now because I know it'll make me feel good. But if that,
for about 2 seconds, as soon as you've swallowed it, the pleasure's over.
that doesn't fit, your daily caloric requirement.
Calories are heat, Lane Norton. You have no requirement to consume heat daily. You produce your own, actually, by way of actually losing heat in an insensible fashion to entropy as a function of the metabolic processes, which are chemical in the human body and not heat-related, okay?
Okay, do I value feeling good right now more than I value wanting to get to my goal? So those people with low recency would choose the long-term goal over the short-term feeling.
Lane also explained that even though it will require some restraint, you should be able to maintain your weight loss by eating more calories than
Now, calories are heat. You can't eat heat.
you were eating while losing the weight. So once you reach
Weight can be made up a lot of different ways. If you're talking about fat, Jeff, say the word. It's not a dirty word. That's what you're talking about. Fucking say so.
your goal weight, you can start to increase your calories to a higher
No, you can't. You cannot consume heat and use that for metabolic process. Calories are heat.
intake, and gradually, if you build the habits and behaviors we've been outlining, it should start to feel less and less restrictive over time.
For me, I struggled with dietary adherence when I first got into
And also with facts, logic, common sense, knowing your place, your ego, and Dunning-Kruger, Lane Norton. Those are the things you struggle with.
bodybuilding until I switched to a more flexible dieting approach. And just the fact that I knew I could eat what I wanted so long as it fit my macros.
As long as it fits your macros. What a fucking idiot. If you needed any one reason to dismiss Lane Norton as a complete cocksplat, if him saying that mass is conserved wasn't enough for you, there it is. Good work, Lane. You fucking idiot.
I had no problems with adherence after that. It feels easy. I continue to do it to this day. Doesn't give me hardly
How's that turning out for you, Lane? How's your physique these days, son?
stress. But there are some people, for them, tracking macros is extremely stressful. I've heard from some people who say, I tried tracking macros. I hated it. I did low carb.
Dear, oh dear. You don't need to track anything ever, boys and girls. Right, I need to pause because I have another appointment to take care of, and I'll be back after that to conclude this exciting ride. See you soon, boys and girls. All right, I'm back. I'm back an hour and a half later for me, but probably just like that for you, wasn't it? Fun. Right, anyway, we were listening to Lame Norton being lame as usual. Go on, Lame.
Carb, and that feels easy to me. And so what I would say to people is find the method of restriction that feels the least restrictive for you as an individual, but also don't assume that what feels easy for you will also feel easy for somebody else.
Yeah, you don't need to restrict anything at all, actually. Lame, all you need to do is eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet. Rest and repeat. Good.
I've also made that mistake as well.
Yeah, you've made many mistakes previously, Lame, including stating publicly that mass is conserved. No, son, it isn't. And also assuming that because you hold a PhD and 1 or 2 peer-reviewed publications, and mostly sports science, actually, Lame, as it seems, that you know something about nutrition and that I don't. Whoops. Okay.
Last but not least, I wanted to have an expert on supplements set the record straight about fat burners. Dr. Eric Trexler has published a whole lot of papers on a variety of different supplements, including caffeine, creatine, omega-3s, and plenty more. And in our chat, he outlined the different types of fat burners that look good in theory and whether or not any of them are actually worth using.
You know, there are plenty of types of supplements out there that are marketed for fat loss. So supplements that are supposed to enhance fat oxidation, things like carnitine and CLA. Stuff that does, in fact, increase energy expenditure, caffeine, capsaicin, ephedrine, yohimbine, stuff like that. You'll also see things that are marketed as kind of hunger reducers. So most anything that's marketed as a thermogenic will also typically impact hunger. But then you've got other stuff like ginger and 5-HTP. And then there's also stuff that's marketed as kind of nutrient blockers. So things that modify or block the absorption of fat or carbohydrate. And so all of those on paper sound great, but the problem is they all have some kind of flaw. For things like caffeine, you worry about, if I try to use this consistently, will I habituate to it? There are some on that list that just have quality control issues, like yohimbine. Some have side effects, like yohimbine and ephedrine. And there of course, are some nutrient blockers that work too well and cause really unfavorable GI distress. And then for most of them, the issue is that there's just a lack of really strong conclusive evidence. And most of the ones that have been really well studied, you'll find that you could achieve what they do with much easier, more affordable methods.
So let's put it all together now. Like, someone comes to you and they're like, I want to lose fat. What supplements do I take? Are there any that you really would recommend to them?
My recommendations would be the same for whether they're doing a fat loss phase or not. So I would still say, like, yeah, there are some supplements that can help you during your fat loss phase. They just don't cause fat loss, right? So things like creatine monohydrate, whey protein if you're not getting enough protein through your food, because high protein diets are fantastic for fat loss goals. When we're on a weight loss diet, sometimes it's hard. We'll restrict fat, and it's hard to get essential fatty acids into the diet. And so fish oil could be a really good option.
No, don't do that. Don't touch fish oils. Absolutely, under any circumstances, I'd say. The reasons for that you will find in a paper written by a very, very smart, very intelligent young scientist called Pim Johnson and some other bald fuck that she was working with at the time. It's in the journal Nutrition. It's called Aldehydes Identified in Omega-3 Oils, a 1-HNMR study, or something similar to that, published around about 2018, I think it was. Very, very dangerous fish oils. Don't go anywhere near them.
There might be some vitamins or minerals that we're getting less of when we start reducing food intake. So it's another good reason why you might consider taking a multivitamin or even a vitamin D supplement as well.
Vitamin D supplements will also be presented with an oil base, which is very likely to be badly oxidized and probably contain aldehydes, the exact problem with the omega-3 oils I was talking about a few minutes ago. Don't go anywhere near those either, I would suggest.
Before we wrap it up, I do want to direct you guys to a few things that I think you'll find helpful when it comes to your own fat loss plan. First, I've linked a few amazing resources that my guests have to offer down below, whether it be a tracking app, an ebook, or some other content. I also have an ebook called The Ultimate Guide to Body Recomposition, which outlines exactly how to set up your diet, whether your main goal is to lose fat, build muscle, or do both equally at the same time. And I'd encourage you guys to all go follow my guests on the respective platforms.
Yeah, I wouldn't bother with most of those whatsoever, frankly. At all. Not good, reliable sources of information, most of them.
They all put out great science-based content.
No, they fucking don't. Some of them. At all. And you're in no position to comment on who does give out good, robust, valid scientific information, Jeff, because you are not a scientist. You are not remotely experienced in science. You wouldn't know good science if you fell across it some. Okay? You're out of your lane. Get back in line.
So I'll have all that linked down below as well. So don't forget to leave the video a thumbs up if you guys enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys all here in the next one.
Right, well there you go. Rubbish. A lot of it. Some reasonable statements made there by one or two individuals, which is good to see, but mostly just rubbish as usual. Okay, join me next time when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs, because there really is a lot of that going on, isn't there? See you then.